And we're live on the Entrepreneur's Handbook podcast. Today we have with us Wei Lien Dang, who's a general partner at Unusual Ventures. Before that, he was a co-founder at StackRox, which got acquired by RedHat. He's an expert in infrastructure and investing in that area. And today he's chosen to talk about open source companies and how to know whether or not you should make your company open source. So, Wei, why did you pick that topic?
Well, thanks so much, Amardeep. Excited to be able to chat with you today. My interest in open source really stems from the fact that we've seen open source impact many software categories over the last couple of decades. And I think it's now it serves as the foundation for many successful businesses. Look at companies like, Elastic and HashiCorp and GitLab. Those are, proof points that open source has now evolved into a significant driver across many software categories and for many different types of users. And, I believe that there are important nuances that, as a founder, you have to consider when you're building an open source company. And you're seeing it now extend to other areas like AI and, AI infrastructure and so on, what's happening with foundation models. And so I think we've seen this increase in both the prevalence and scope that open source is impacting in terms of different spaces. And so for me, it's a fascinating subject, that I think, is important, for any founder in infrastructure software to think about.
Yeah. And like, as you said there, so obviously with OpenAI now, it's very typical for those reasons, but it's open source in so many different industries, right? And let's say at a generic level, you're a founder and you're trying to decide, should my company be open source? Should it not be open source? What are some of the main motivations that should drive you to becoming open source? Because some people might be listening thinking, why would I ever do that? Why would I let my code be out there?
Yeah, I think it's really the starting question, Amardeep, fundamentally that you have to ask as a founder. Historically, I think open source was actually, it kind of originated because it was a strategy that was designed to target very established incumbents, which with large profit margins, and open source provided a way to establish yourself as another player that could kind of grab market share from those incumbents. Look at what, Linux and Red Hat originally did. But I think it's now evolved such that there are many different reasons why you might consider going open source from the beginning. The first actually has to do, in my opinion, with how your target user audience wants to adopt and onboard, to your product. Consider software developers. A lot of them prefer self-service. They want to get started quickly and realize time to value. They don't want to be marketed or sold to. And so the traditional way that you would distribute and get them on, distribute your software and get them onto your product has changed for many of those types of users. And so I think the first consideration is, does your target user want to, adopt in a way that open source can enable a better product or user experience? So it's sort of table stakes, I think, in certain categories. The second is, if you consider the category and the impact of open standards. So if you look at particular ecosystems or spaces like the cloud native computing community and so on, there's a heavy emphasis on going open source and keeping the standards open in order to enable greater trust in what people are adopting and using. So take things like Kubernetes or other mission critical infrastructure components. Consider databases. A lot of organizations, will say, I want the database I use to be open source so that I know, what's in it. I know that it's, potentially more secure or more reliable. I understand and can look at the code if I want. There's also another aspect of, certain organizations, are more willing to work with startups when they know something's open source, because if the business doesn't end up working out, the code is still available. So, I think that's the second consideration. The third is, are you in a space where open source can actually be a differentiated go-to-market for you? Can you tackle some of these more established or emerging incumbents, that are based on proprietary solutions? And you're seeing that, to analogize again, you can see that in AI, where you have, the early leaders, like OpenAI and Cohere and Anthropic, and now you're seeing this wave of open source models kind of, tackle to compete, emerge to compete against them. The fourth is, I think in certain respects, open source can be really effective to drive faster product development and overall product velocity, because when you're engaged in collecting feedback, from a larger user base, it allows you to iterate more quickly. And then the last consideration I would say, that might drive founders to consider an open source based approach is hiring. I think there's a lot of engineers out there who value the ability to engage in the open around their work, whether it's being able to publicize what they're working on, as well as potentially engage with a community of users and have that sort of direct line, which you don't always get if you're building in a more traditional way. You have an organization built around other functions that might be more customer or user facing, and it can be exciting for engineers to be able to hear direct feedback from early adopters and users.
I think it's really interesting what you said as well about because the company is open source, it means that other companies might be more willing to take a risk on that software. And I think I never really thought of it in that way before, obviously, because if, like you said, the company goes bust, it doesn't just mean if it's a black box software, you're screwed basically, right? There's what do you do, because your database, especially for mission critical things, right? So say like your database or a key component of your tech stack. If that company goes bust, and it's often why, like you said, where people will stay with incumbent firms, even though they know it's not the most effective solution. But if it's built by Oracle or Microsoft or wherever, that company's going to be there. It's not going to just disappear, and they've got a reputational risk to just leave you in the lurch. And I guess it's one aspect of how open source founders can interact with early adopters. But what are the other ways that people can, if you're creating open source software, you can get this people early on board to believe in what you're doing?
So I think some of the key things to think about, as you're sort of bootstrapping that user base, so to speak, Amardeep, one is you want to make it super easy for them to familiarize themselves and get started with your project. And so, I think a lot of founders who go open source, they think it's a matter of simply flipping the repo public and posting on Hacker News and it's going to go viral. And that is rarely the case. How you think of, some of the key components or aspects of bootstrapping, a successful open source user base start with what is that user experience and what is it like to get started. And so, a lot of the most successful open source founders, they think, obsessively about how they can eliminate as much friction as possible, in getting started, making it as easy as possible to onboard. And part of that is not just about the project or product itself. It's also about technical documentation, about tutorials and getting started guides and educational content on, your project or product and your particular approach and the problem you're trying to solve. And so, also having, things set up like a Slack or Discord so that people can start to voice their questions and get responses and, engage around your project. And so I think it's more than just the project itself is what I would say. And you have to make it as easy and frictionless as possible to get on board. I also think, thinking about what's the appropriate sort of, so-called scope to launch with is important. Like you want users to get standalone value out of an open source project. I think there are companies out there who think of open source as simply a marketing tool or frankly, marketing gimmick. It's like, oh, this is a way for me to just generate leads. But the most effective leads for an open source company are people who are using and engaged, as opposed to, they just tested something out, but it's only part of a solution, or, it's sort of half baked. And so I think thinking about, what is a concrete problem that you can solve, with that your open source project clearly solves, and it is available to everyone, is a really important aspect, as opposed to just thinking of open source as, a marketing tool or marketing strategy. I think that the companies that truly pull off open source well, going back to some of those examples that are now public that I was talking about, open source was really foundational to how they thought about people getting started with their product, which then presented opportunities for them to do more over time.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like I said, because you see so many SaaS companies now, right? So many companies that will use these different buzzwords, but then behind that, it's not about the buzzword, right? It's about what's the actual value that's being added from it, as you mentioned. And let's say you've started to build a product, right? And you think it's pretty good, if you think so yourself. But you now, how do you go to market? Like, how do you get that strategy in place to really start scaling?
So one is, I would say, with open source, that your user base is actually going to be quite discerning. Like take developers or data engineers or these folks that have a history and track record of being comfortable adopting and running open source. I mean, they have low tolerance for BS, which is one of the reasons why like they prefer not to be sold to. Like they don't want to be marketed to using the buzzwords that you're referencing, Amardeep. And so I think one of the some of the most effective approaches to how you can engage with them and start to go to market in that respect, it really stems from how you engage and foster and nurture an early community. And big parts of that involve first bringing authenticity to your user base in terms of how you communicate, how you engage. I've talked to the founders of companies like Vercel and Cockroach Labs and these really successful open source companies. And I think the consistent thing that stands out when you talk to them about how they engage with their early users is they sought them out. Like they tried to really understand whether the open source project was meeting their needs or not, how they were taking the open source project and using it, to the extent that they knew every single person in the in the early community up to the first couple hundred. And I think that's how you start to build and gain momentum when it comes to this more sort of grassroots adoption. Like you want to think about how do you start to build that groundswell, and the best way to build the groundswell is where you're not just over time doing it yourself. You're leveraging a whole base and community of users who are start to spread and talk about the value that your open source project brings. And I think part of that is your early adopters are key. Understanding and getting your early contributors involved and engaged is key, because they're the ones who will help amplify sort of the the initial thought leadership or message that you're putting out there in terms of what you're hoping people will look to your open source project for. And so I think it's a different way of how you think about building a user base relative to your traditional SaaS company. I mean, you could analogize there's some compare and contrast with, say, PLG, but I think there's important nuances in terms of how you prioritize driving adoption, how you engage, who you engage, as opposed to sort of your typical B2B SaaS business.
And I think it's interesting there because you mentioned how it's the people who are going to be using open source software at the beginning is likely to be the developers, the software engineers, the people who, like you said, they're not going to take any BS. If they think something isn't good, they're going to say it, and they're going to be very vocal about that. And so in a past life, I was a technology consultant myself, right? So I'd use all these different things. And if something wasn't very good, I would you'd go on, I think Stack Exchange is now dead because that's showing how old I am. But there used to be always places you go to and you'd ask these questions because it's like, why isn't this working? This should be working. Why is this happening? And when you've got a community like that who are very knowledgeable and very educated, what are some of the best practices to really keep them on your side, right? Because they can both take your company and help it to grow massively, but it can also be the downfall too.
Well, I think the few things that you see among successful open source founders and companies is one is there's a big emphasis on communication and how you communicate. Communicating clearly and inclusively and authentically. I mean, again, looking at communities built around a number of Apache projects around the CNCF, and a big part of it is clear communication around project direction and roadmap and vision, and getting people involved. And I mean, tactically, I mean, this even goes down to like what's your code of conduct, how do you want people to contribute. And so I think being really clear about that, it's not just about the project roadmap. I mean, it's easy for people to gravitate towards that, but I think how you think about fostering how you want people to engage is important. I think the second is you have to be active or proactive, so to speak. I think there are some founders out there who think, oh, community engagement is a DevRel thing, and I can hire someone to take care of that, and I can outsource it, so to speak. And that's a mistake. Early users, and overall the community is looking to to you as a founder, to provide that thought leadership and community leadership. And so you can't outsource that role. What I tell founders is it's much more effective to bring on someone who can help amplify your voice and project and engage once you have to scale beyond yourself. But I think that you as a founder, open source founder, you have to have a laser focus on your users, and you have to do it in a way that is highly relatable. So I think that's another key aspect of going to market and community building. The third is, I would actually say, setting expectations around things like governance. How are decisions going to be made? How are contributors and maintainers and kind of key participants you're going to work together? I think that coordination is really important. I think the other is actually also setting early expectations around here's what's going to be open source and here's what's going to be commercial. Because at the end of the day, you have to build a successful business. And I think the best founders are able to drive a synergy between the open source side and the commercial side or enterprise side, and they're able to get everyone, including the community, as well as company, the folks at the company and so on, aligned around that. And I think you want to think about that early, because you don't want to change things on your user base. Like, I think it'll turn them off, it'll make them unhappy. And so I think setting some early expectations, which requires you, as a founder, you to think about what the potential business or monetization models are, is worthwhile, as opposed to, well, we're just going to focus on adoption and think about that later. I think it's worthwhile to think about it, even if you don't necessarily implement it until later.
Yeah, because we've seen this problem time and time again. So you look at Reddit, for example, where people get used to using something for free. And if you're able to make it accessible early on, but then at the same time, you have to think about the business side, right? Because you can't just keep taking on funding to try and cover that. You've got to work out, okay, you've got an engaged community, but you also need to be looking at how is it going to be monetized in a way, like you said, that doesn't then piss them off in the future. And like, you're on the other side of the table now, right? So you're looking at investing in these type of companies. And you've mentioned, like, as we've been talking about, some of the companies you've talked to, so Cockroach Labs and people like that as well. And you've invested in multiple successful companies. And what do you look at? What metrics are you looking at to determine which ones you think are worth you investing in and betting on compared to the ones you pass over?
Sure. And, I would say that, open source founders today, they benefit from the fact that there are now well-established business models, much more so than, if you went back, 20 years ago and you had, relatively few companies like Red Hat, somewhat, I don't want to say like, they're still figuring it out, in terms of, how could you drive, a significant multi-billion-dollar business. And so, whether that's, open core or managed service or some, there's these established monetization models that I think give people more confidence, around the path going from open source to commercial. I think that, Series A investors, in particular, I think they'll look, for they'll look for indicators of product market fit, just as they would look at, non-open source businesses in terms of what they assess for. But I think that the metrics and signals that they'd use to assess for product market fit are different with regards to open source. You mentioned metrics, and I think that there's a set of metrics that, can be used to better understand, even as a founder, the extent to which your project has, project or product market fit. So there's the public metrics, of course, things like GitHub metrics like stars and forks and contributors. To me, I think these are informative because I think of them as sort of a measure of relative mind share. So, you can think of sort of a relative marketing share of voice just in an open source context, and I think a lot of people will often focus on the absolute number. I think that's less informative. I think thinking about what's the slope in these metrics, like effectively slope in mind share and awareness. I think the other aspect is thinking about, what category are you in terms of whether it's infra software or something else. You'll find that the number of stars, as an example, will differ significantly, whether you're a developer tool, whether you're a data infrastructure tool, whether you're a security tool or project. And so I think thinking about it in the context of peer projects, and comparable categories is important. I think separate from what's public and on GitHub or elsewhere, I think thinking about metrics that help assess usage and engagement are incredibly important. So thinking about, how many, people are in your community, how involved are they, how engaged are they, are they, does the commentary and do their questions indicate that, they're actively using you, in a way that helps you get feedback that helps drive the project forward, and is there what I call velocity in terms of activity with regards to the open source. I think investors will also look at who is in the community, who's adopting and who's using. It's not that everyone has to necessarily be willing to pay. I think that there are organizations and teams who are very comfortable simply running open source. They have the personnel, they have the resources and expertise to be able to do that and want to do that, or they might want to even customize or extend the open source. I think what those companies bring is credibility to the project, and then you have a set of organizations who will want to pay. And I think the reason why investors want to look at who's adopting is there a path to building a business. Do the people in who have adopted, are they at organizations that have budget, that have an a business need around purchasing your software at some point. And this is indicated by how they're using as well. Are they running the open source project in production? Have they extended it to integrate with their tool, existing tooling and workflows? Things like that. I think help. You can gauge how sticky a project is. And so I think those are some of the key things that people will look at in the context of an open source company that are somewhat different from a typical SaaS or enterprise software company. But the goal is still the same, which is do you have product market fit with the the emerging user base, behind the open source project.
Yeah, and like we've mentioned AI a few times as well in the episode so far. But before we go to the final part, let's just get your thoughts on that. So obviously, OpenAI has taken the world by storm in the last year. And what are your thoughts on how open source works in that vertical in particular with AI? And whether or not sustainable as well with what they're doing, and with other AI companies, like how they should be thinking about open source as well.
Open source, in my opinion, is now the most significant driver in AI. And I say that and I'm incredibly excited because I think it's going to have a wide, far-reaching impact that we're still in the early days of. But I think some of the most notable ways that you see open source impacting AI right now is in a couple key respects. And I focus on infrastructure software, so it's with that lens. But I would say in the last year, we've seen significant progress in open source models. As an example, OpenAI and ChatGPT captured the imagination of millions and millions of people. But I think going forward, you're now seeing across different areas. In images, you have stable diffusion. In large language models, you have Llama and Falcon and Dolly and all these this wave of new LLMs. In other modalities, computer vision and speech and video, you're seeing the same. And I think that's presenting more choice to companies that's going to open up the adoption and the rate of adoption of AI into what organizations are doing, both in terms of building new applications to serve their customers or users, as well as internal use cases in terms of how they can leverage AI for greater employee productivity, for instance. And so I would say you're seeing a lot of activity in terms of foundation models with regards to open source. You're also seeing a lot with regards to tooling. There's a whole lot of things that have to come together to build new AI-based applications. And so, for instance, you need a vector database, and we invested in an open source vector database company called Quadrant as an example. You need developer tooling. You see tools like LangChain and so on. And a lot of the reasons and benefits of these things being open source go back to what I was saying earlier in terms of why a founder would want to consider going open source. You're seeing significant mindshare and adoption around these new projects and solutions that are open from the beginning that make it easier for people to get started and more quickly build AI applications. I expect that to continue. And I think that, again, we're in the early days of how open source will ultimately impact AI overall. But we've seen significant rapid progress among many, many people. And I think the thing that I often think about is it's hard to bet against an entire community. You have great company, organizations like OpenAI and so on, who are driving huge innovations, in the space. But a community of people collectively can also drive, significant developments that have wide-reaching impact.
So, been fascinating to talk to you today, Wei. Like, before we go, have you got 3 people that you'd love to shout out that you think are doing incredible things in the entrepreneurship space?
Yeah, thanks, Armand. I'll highlight 3 folks who sort of play different roles with regards to open source. The first is I call out my partner and co-founder at Unusual Ventures, John Veronis, who has long track record of investing in amazing open source companies, and he and I partner closely to think about a lot of the nuances and things that I've shared about today. The second is I have a founder, Toby Mao, at this company called Tobiko Data. They have an open source data infrastructure project called SQL Mesh that has really started to take off and gain widespread attention. And I think that he's an example of a founder who's thought about how to go about open source effectively from the beginning. And then the third is a founder of an open source company I respect a lot. This is Guillermo Rauch, who's the founder CEO of a company called Vercel. And I think through my conversations with him, I mean, he's just had remarkable insights into things around building a community, how to engage with users, how to think about the building open source at the foundation of the company building journey. And so just want to call him out because I think he is a huge resource to any open source founder out there, and talks a lot about it as well. So would encourage anyone out there who's interested to reach out to him or to check out some of his other content.
And let's say people listening right now want to reach out to you or find out more about you and Unusual Ventures. Where would you send them to?
Absolutely. So you can find me personally on Twitter at Wei Lien Dang. On the Unusual website at unusual.vc, we have a number of resources available to any founder out there, including an entire what we call open source field guide. You can think of this as a blueprint for best practices and some of the sort of steps and tactics that I talked about today in terms of how to go about building an open source company. So it covers a different parts of the open source journey with commentary from a number of different open source founders. So the founders of Elastic and Cockroach Labs and DataStax and other great companies comment throughout the field guide. And so I would encourage any open source founder out there to check it out, and would love to chat with folks who are thinking about open source or who are already building something in infrastructure software.
And then finally, is there anything that maybe the audience could help you with or help Unusual Ventures with?
I always love, I think part of, being a venture investor, is the learning and, intellectual curiosity that's involved. And so I always love to learn about, new companies and spaces and projects and products. And so to the extent that, folks want to share about, what they're building or, a cool product that they know of, I would always love to hear about, would always love to engage around that, and would love to chat with anyone who just has a shared interest and passion around infrastructure software, whether that's developer tools or cybersecurity or data or AI infrastructure. Would love to engage. So please feel free to reach out.
So thanks so much for coming on today, Wei. Any final words to the audience?
Thank you so much for having me on, Amardeep. Really enjoyed the conversation and appreciate the chance to share some of my insights in terms of how founders can approach building an open source company.